It's not in the face! Thank you.
Hello and welcome to Hey, Not the Face with your host, John Nash, and your producer, me, Steffi Haynes. And today we are going to go over a Global Fight League contract. But first, let's check in with John and see how the week has been.
Oh, terrible. Feeling awful.
Oh, no.
Oh, yeah. I don't think I got a cold. I just think my voice my throat is sore. The weather's got to me. It's just, I'm up in the Great Plains, up in the tundra of Minnesota. But besides that, it's going great.
What's the weather like there as far as temperature?
Oh, it's warmed up the last today and yesterday. I think it's in the above freezing is the high, but it was Friday, Saturday. It was like, at night, I think a high was like 6 degrees one day, and at night it was like -8 with wind chill, -18, -20.
Wow. Yeah, it's 71 degrees here at 9:30 p.m.
Oh, well, screw you.
I mean, I'm enjoying California style weather here in Texas.
Enjoy it while you can, because when summer comes, it'll be 148 degrees where you are.
I know. And so I only get to gloat like 2 times a year. So let me gloat.
Well, gloat all you want. It's gonna, it'll be one of the 2 times. I'm keeping track.
So, John, tell me what we're looking at today exactly, because there's lots of little clauses in here that you were showing me before that. Wow.
Yeah, it's we are looking at basically the template. I got several contracts from global fighters, managers that have contracts or they're looking over or have signed with Global Fight League, the new promotion, at their big coming out party on the Ariel Helwani show. And I have taken one of them because I looked at it all. They're identical. So this is basically a template that the contract of adhesion they are offering to all the fighters that are signing with them. And we are going to go through it. Not everything, but we're going to go through like all the stuff that might be slightly different or very, very different than what you would see in the PFL, UFC, Bellator contracts that we have done episodes on.
All right. So, looking through it, it kind of looks similar to what we see from other MMA promotions, but near the top, it has this section for the exclusive period, and it reads, non-exclusive period from the effective date until January 15th, 2025. The parties acknowledge that this agreement shall be non-exclusive, allowing fighter to continue to compete for any other combat sports promotion or event. Upon notification of GFL's intent to utilize fighters' services by January 31st, 2025, then and only then will this agreement become binding onto the parties. Fighters shall not enter into any other agreements that may limit or interfere with GFL's ability to utilize fighters' services contained in this agreement during the non-exclusive period, and in parentheses it says e.g. multi-fight promotional agreements, rematch clauses, matching right clauses. In the event fighter is notified of GFL's intent not to utilize fighter's services, this agreement shall become null and void, with neither party owing any further obligation to the other. So, what exactly does that mean for the fighters?
Well, what that basically means is you've signed basically it's a letter of intent more than anything for the fighter. You've signed an agreement with GFL, not PFL. God, I'm probably going to screw that up 90 times in this episode. But GFL, Global Fight League, the newest acronym in the business. What that means is you've signed an agreement that you're going to fight with them. Up until January 15th, you can go fight with anybody you want. But you can't sign any agreement that goes past that date. And then on January 31st, you will get notification that you are January 31st of next month, you will get notification about GFL's intent to utilize you. So basically it's saying between now and the end of next month, you are free to fight, do whatever you want. But after that, the agreement will kick in.
Okay. Now, the next little section that we're going to focus on is the terms. And it reads, unless terminated earlier under the terms of this agreement shall commence on the effective date and shall continue through November 30th, 2025, which they have in parentheses is the initial term or the season term. The initial term includes all MMA fights and promotional activities as defined below during 2025. Now, there is no number of fights listed, so how should we interpret that?
Well, that's interesting because unlike the other promotions where basically an agreement is for a set number of fights, the UFC, you have a 5-fight, 20-month agreement. Bellator was the same. PFL is slightly different. You have seasons, but they say in the season how many fights you're going to have. This is just you're signed to the agreement for the period, basically from January 31st to November 30th of next year. So, we're talking a 10-month period because December and January are the only 2 months not covered. So you're signed for a 10-month period. So it's, the agreement is how many fights could you possibly have in that? We will have to see later. We get details about how the GFL season works and how many fights they have coming up. But for right now, there's no set number of fights, minimum or maximum they're going to be offered. There's just that this is the set period that you're signed to the promotion.
What about matching rights? That's not the same, right? Or is it the same?
Well, the next, if people follow along with their contracts, which we will not offer you because we can't show that to you, we'll have sections of this up. But people, maybe fighters or managers are listening and they have these GFL contracts with them. The next section in terms is about matching rights. This is not the typical matching rights you would see in an MMA contract normally. Later in the contract, we'll get to those. But here, these matching rights are the promoter shall have the option to extend this agreement for additional terms upon mutual agreement of the parties. In other words, that it's really just the promoter and the fighter, both of them, if they come to a mutual agreement, they can extend the contract, which is normal for all fighters. It's really just you've made an alteration to the contract, but here they have they've given it its own little term section, matching rights.
Now, a little further down, there's a section on compensation. While the actual amounts are later on in Schedule A at the end of the contract, it does have this provision. GFL shall pay fighter after the completion of any MMA fight fighter performs within 3 business days. If GFL fails to timely pay fighter or otherwise allegedly breaches any of its obligations under this agreement, GFL shall have 30 days from the receipt of a detailed written notice of such breach to remedy such breach. It's called the cure period. Until the receipt of such written notice and expiration of the cure period, GFL shall not be considered in breach of any of the terms or conditions of this agreement. What the heck does that mean? Because it seems like a lot of doublespeak.
Well, normally, as we understand in the U.S., the United States, with sanction organizations, not sanction organizations, but athletic commissions, you're supposed to have a bond, the money in an account, right, before you have the event. And you have to give the night of the fight, you have to give the fighters checked. Now, in boxing and MMA both, often a fighter will agree with the promoter, like, you give us a check that'll be canceled and you'll pay us later. UFC, because they have so much money, they typically pay the night of. But when they're overseas, out of the United States, away from athletic commissions, they have a rule. It's either 3 or 4 days. I think they might have made it 4 days now for UFC contracts, but they have up to 4 days to pay you by wire your contracted amount. Here it says 3 days to pay you. And on top of that, if they don't pay you, this is the part that maybe I know has caught some eyeballs for people that are looking at these, is that they don't pay you, they fail, then you have to send a written notice to them that you failed and they have 30 days to pay you. Now, the concern would be, and I should note, from what I understand, is GFL has financing for basically the season. They are financed. So hopefully this isn't a problem. But what the concern would be is something you might see in low budget filmmaking in Hollywood. I experienced this years ago, where someone's making a film, got you on payroll, and then suddenly you're always paid like a week or two after your work. It's a delay. So the last week of production's coming, and we had a problem with the payroll company, so we didn't get paid. And so you would end up working for, you're waiting for your last check, but work that last week. Well, what that means is not only did you not get paid for the previous week or 2 weeks, then they could maybe not pay you for the last week. And that would be a way a low budget company would save money and basically make you delay while they, they either didn't have any money left to pay you, or they wanted to use it on other things and pay you at a later date. And you were kind of hosed as a worker. That's the fear I think some people would have looking at this is what happens if PFL says,
you mean
can't
GFL?
pay you. GFL. Got to be careful because PFL, I apologize. We don't want to make you guys, you get enough bad press. You don't need more from me. But GFL, what happens if they don't pay us and then they make us wait 30 days? I mean, by that time, if they don't have the money, the company could implode, right? So that's got to be the concern that people are signing this, is that GFL could go into a season and not have the financing, hold an event, and then basically say, well, we got 30 days to pay you, and then never raise the money to pay the fighters. That is the concern. Now, like I said, my understanding is they're financed, so hopefully that isn't a problem. But that's what caught people's attention, that the idea that at a later date, Don King supposedly had this in his contracts a lot. So that's not, when someone says Don King had it, it's usually not a good sign. So that's something people maybe should be paying attention to.
Now, jumping to the promotional rights, it says the fighter grants the GFL the right to promote their events and choose their opponents. And it also says GFL, at its sole discretion, may allocate fighter to any of the GFL teams and may implement a draft to do so. How does that work?
Okay, well, that's a question. That's a good question because that's in the GFL rules, and I have not seen the GFL rules. I have not seen, the whatever guidelines they have for a draft, anything like that. I haven't seen it. The people I've talked to haven't seen it either, so I don't even know if it's been issued yet. But basically, what they're saying is that because GFL is a season format, you're going to have a team base. You have no control over what team you're going to be assigned to. And you also, they might just have a draft where the teams pick you. So you have to accept that. Now, the question for fighters, I shouldn't say the question, the concern would be, because it's team-based and one fighter fights at a time, what happens if you're a good fighter, but you are picked to back up a great fighter at your weight class? Does that mean you will be, not fighting as much because that guy will be the first choice to fight all the time? Stuff like that, which you might not have any control over, which you're basically saying, I'm accepting these terms to a rule, a format for the promotion that we have not seen yet. So another thing to be aware of.
All right. Promotional rights. They also include the following about what the rules will be. And it says here, fighter agrees to abide by all rules and regulations of applicable athletic commission. Fighter acknowledges that GFL may request certain rules, rule enforcement, or rule changes from the applicable athletic commission, including but not limited to GFL rules. All combative and non-combative rules of the MMA fights and GFL's league format shall be solely determined by GFL. GFL may change GFL rules from time to time at its sole discretion. So what are the rules exactly?
Well, as I just noted, that's the problem. We don't have the rules attached to these agreements. My understanding is people haven't seen the official GFL rules yet. On Helwani's show, they did kind of lay out with some of them, basically that they're going to have different weight classes. So the rules will probably fall and stuff like that, but we have not seen the rules, and then we don't know what the rule changes will be because we haven't even seen the rules. So again, it's I'm not going to say it's, going to be outlandish, but it is interesting. They have specific rules for GFL, which are going to be slightly different than the athletic commissions, what's typical for MMA. but we have not seen. We are not fully aware of what the rules are, except for the fact that like each weight class will be 10 pounds higher. Is the one I heard for sure.
Further on, there's a section on season exclusivity, and it has in parentheses April 1st, 2025 to November 30th, 2025. During the specified season term, GFL shall have the exclusive right to promote all of fighters' MMA fights throughout the world, in parentheses, the territory. Fighters shall not participate in or directly endorse any other MMA, boxing, kickboxing, professional wrestling, grappling, or any other fighting bout, fight, event, competition, or exhibition in the territory without the express written authorization of the GFL. For avoidance of doubt, fighters shall be able to corner or coach any other fighter in any combat sports bout without express written authorization from GFL. Can you please explain what that means?
Well, the way I read it and the way it sounds is they're saying during the season period, April 1st, 2025 till November 30th, 2025, the fighter can appear on other promotions events to corner fighters, but what they can't do without permission of the GFL is show up in a way that promotes another promotion, be professional wrestling, jiu-jitsu, grappling, submission grappling, boxing matches, other MMA promotions, which makes me, they obviously can't participate because you have an exclusive contract with them, which is strange because a lot of the fighters I know were being interviewed said they're allowed to box and do other stuff, which is, they're allowed to box or kickbox or do other events outside the season, but GFL is only signing for the season. So technically it's still exclusive, but you also can't appear at events where I think they, at least according to this, the way it's worded would suggest you can't appear at events where it could be looking like you're endorsing the event. And an example I think of that would be like, remember when John Jones showed up at an event in Saudi Arabia, the PFL event, I think it was, with and then they put him against Francis Ngannou, PFL did. Yes. I think they're trying to nick stuff like that in the bud, which I think it's, independent contractors. I think they should be allowed to go and appear at other events, in support of friends, whatever they want to do, no problem. But for GFL, they want to put this in the contract and say you can, at least it reads that way to me. I'm sure people could look at this and say, they really can't do that. Or this is technically, we are not directly endorsing another MMA promotion or whatever. But I think that's what they're trying to at least put a chilling effect to get fighters to think twice before doing something like that.
A little later, the agreement says either party shall have the right to terminate this agreement before January 31st, 2025, for any reason without penalty or recourse of any kind. Either party may terminate this agreement by giving written notice to the other party, and no compensation shall be paid to either party. Is this a real contract? Because it doesn't sound like one to me.
Well, there are technically agreements, but this is the part that really caught my eye. Or previous, like the idea that they have to notify you at the very start of the contract if they're going to, sign, accept the agreement, the PFL or GFL, God dang it, the GFL, if they're going to accept it. That right there is a little alarming because, it's like, well, does that mean are the contracts these fighters signing even going to be good? Because the GFL has to agree to them. This basically says that these contracts, they're not binding of any sort, which is in some ways great, right? Because if a fighter finds a better offer, it's like you're giving me an out to go get a better offer, but also means that there's no guarantee that GFL will take you. So I have questions about how many fighters they're promoting right now, right? How many fighters that they have that they say that they've gotten, that there's big draws, that they are going to who've signed. When we get to the compensation later, we will talk about how big the money is for some of these fighters. How many of them are they actually going to activate these agreements, or how many they're going to send a note and say, we are not going to activate, we're going to terminate the agreement. So a lot of these fighters might have signed with GFL. That does not mean that they actually after January 31st next year, they will have a contract with GFL. And I guess the other thing is that depending on when the draft is it going to be before and after that date? I haven't heard yet, but if it's before that date, how many fighters are not going to be drafted and then find out that they're terminated? So that's the big question for me, is for all these fighters that sign these agreements and maybe be excited about getting a paycheck from GFL, there's no guarantee this will happen because they can terminate the agreement before January 31st.
All right. Now, under GFL's obligations, we have this quote: "For avoidance of doubt, if provided that fighter is ready and willing to compete, medically cleared, and otherwise in compliance with this agreement, promoter shall offer fighter at minimum 2 MMA fights during the season term, unless fighter is designated as an alternate, in which case fighter is not guaranteed any bouts during the season term." John, that doesn't sound right to me. Are they guaranteed 2 fights or not?
Well, just like it doesn't sound like you're guaranteed to actually have a contract, if you're made an alternate, that means you're not guaranteed, right? If it says that you're not guaranteed a bout by being declared an alternate, then you're not guaranteed a bout. Now we'd have to see the rules, how many fights per year they're going to be, and how many times. Maybe there's a rule that says you can't be declared an alternate more than once or twice or something like that. But it's not in this contract, those rules. And so if you're declared at least according to this, if you're offered, they can offer you 2 fights minimum they have to offer you, but can also designate you an alternate. That means you're right. There's no guarantee you'll get any fights.
I mean, would there be some form of compensation? Is there anything in there about compensation for alternates?
we will get to compensation, and because compensation is interesting for the GFL, how it works. So we will have to discuss that a little bit. But for right now, my concern would be that I would not get fights under this agreement. My first concern would be, will the GFL activate the contract? Do I even have a contract? My second concern is, will I actually get fights under the GFL?
Okay. All right. Under fighters' obligation, this is the quote: "Fighters shall be on time for all promotional activities and MMA fights and show professionalism and respect. If fighter is more than 15 minutes late to any MMA fight for any reason, the GFL may cancel the MMA fight. If GFL cancels the MMA fight, then GFL is not obligated to make payment of any kind to fighter. If GFL proceeds with the fight, then GFL may reduce the compensation to fighter for that MMA fight by up to 20%. Now, John, how the hell is anyone late to an MMA fight?
Yeah, that was the phrasing of that was interesting, because I understand people are late to the event, late to weigh-ins, late to check-ins, late to all the other things, the pre-fight stuff. But the fight itself is when the fight starts, right? And there's usually there'll be a definition in these provisions. There's no definition of fight time, how a fight is late. So I read that the fight is supposed to start at this time and the fighter hasn't shown up. Normally they would, it's a no contest, or the fight is ruled, that it's not going to happen because no one even entered the cage. But I do have questions about that. I guess maybe for GFL, they just sit and wait around and put a clock on, and you have to run out there and make it. But I'm guessing what they mean, although they're not clear, is that there's a specific time you have to be there before the fight. You have to be there ahead of time, a certain amount before a fight. And if you're late to that, then they can dock you 20%, because I have never seen anybody show up late to the fight per se. Have you ever seen that in a show?
I have never, ever. But I do have a question on this for you. Yes. Side question. The last part got me. If GFL proceeds with the fight, then GFL may reduce the compensation to fighter for that MMA fight by up to 20%. Is that legal? I thought only sanctioning bodies could actually fine a fighter, and that the deal that the UFC has when a fighter misses weight, that percentage goes to the other fighter. Isn't that something that's worked out already with the sanctioning?
Well, somewhat, but if it's in a contract, they basically let anything go in the contract. Okay. Whatever's in the contract, barring a few things, if you have a contractual terms, if you made an agreement that says, you see that all the time in individual agreements. If I miss weight, I have to pay you, Mayweather versus JMMM, $500,000. Remember that? Or Haney Garcia. So there's contractual terms you can put in above and beyond whatever the athletic commission has to do.
Okay. Let's see here. This section, if fighter fails to participate or perform at an MMA fight where fighter is scheduled to compete for any reason, including those specified in this section, GFL may elect in its sole discretion to 1. Remove fighter from then currently scheduled MMA fight, 2. Terminate this agreement by providing fighter with 10 days prior written notice thereof. Now, does this include if you drop out with an injury?
Well, it reads that way, and it's UFC and other promotions have something somewhat similar, but not quite as, I guess, vague, where, if you miss a fight or unable to, they do have the right to terminate the agreement. But the way this is written is fails to participate or perform. It's not clear, the reasons for dropping out. You'd think that would cover an injury if because they booked a fight or, they set a date because they're the ones that book the fight. We'll get on that. They book the date and time. And then you announce that I cannot participate in that bout because I'm injured or whatever. They can terminate you. That's a little farther reaching than like the UFC contracts where basically we get to extend the contract then for 6 months.
This next one, this is about social media. And apparently the fighters are required to have social media platforms. And the quote says, fighters shall promote all of fighters' MMA fights on a bi-weekly basis on all of fighters' active social media outlets. Talk about that.
Yeah. The reason I thought this was noteworthy only because they are hyping how much the social media reach of a lot of the fighters they're getting are. Remember that deck? They talked about, look at the top social media followers, fighters that we're getting. And on Helwani, they said the same thing. So obviously social media is a big part of their business model or plan here.
That's so silly because X is a wasteland. Blue Sky's just getting started. Threads is kind of dead in the water. And Insta seems to be sort of stagnant. So I don't understand why they put so much emphasis on that, but that's just me. Now, can fighters wager on events?
Well, I put this in. I know I made a mark for this one for you because you are big into the wager rules that UFC came up. And they do have a very big wager rule section about wagering. Fighters shall not directly or indirectly wager or attempt to wager on the outcomes of or any other aspect of any MMA fight or any other GFL event. B, contrive or attempt to contrive the outcome or any other aspect of any MMA fight or any other GFL or other MMA competition. C, solicit, facilitate, or encourage any MMA competitor or official not to use his or her best efforts or best judgments in any MMA fight or any other GFL or other MMA competition. D, solicit or accept or offer or provide any money or benefit with the intention of influencing an MMA competitor or official's best efforts or best judgments in any MMA fight or any other GFL or other MMA competition. And then it goes on, basically the same stuff. But I think it's pretty obvious they are covering themselves based on the UFC scandal, right? Where they're not only are they saying you can't wager on the events or on any MMA fight, but also you can't, contrive the outcome in any way. They're basically covering their bases on the what we saw in the UFC, where guys would show up, or at least supposedly, apparently, show up injured, or they knew they were injured going to the fight, and so they are really going wall to wall coverage here, trying to make sure that they are covered and that the fighter is going to hold the brunt and be the one that's going to take any punishment for doing anything along those lines.
Is there a code of conduct?
There is also a code of conduct in it, not quite as long as the UFC's. But they have to, the fighter has to acknowledge and agrees that the agreement's value to GFL is based a large part on the goodwill and positive publicity generated by fighter, the MMA fights, the promotional activities, and GFL's use and exploitation of the foregoing in accordance with the terms of the agreement. And then they go through a bunch of stuff. Basically, the fighter's behavior, they can't bring up scandals, they can't do anything to impugn the sponsors or the promotion themselves. Basically, the far-reaching code of conduct that we're now seeing with almost, I think, all MMA promotions basically have this now. So, yes, they have it. Just like everybody else, they have it.
Okay, so what are reasons that fighters can be suspended or terminated?
Okay, this is further down the contract. We are going to skip a lot of stuff that's identical, boilerplate to all the other MMA promotions. But they have a list, kind of like we read off the list for the UFC contract. I think we read off the list of stuff for the Bellator contracts that can get you suspended. A lot of them will be the same, but I'll go through them again. One is if a fighter tests positive for any controlled substance or any banned substance as administered or regulated by GFL or any other athletic commission. The occurrence or disclosure of any disparagement act. So the Disparagement Act, of course, was saying anything bad about GFL under the previous code of conduct. Fighter fails to make weight for fighter's MMA fight. D, fighter breaches or violates any representation, warranty, or other provision of this agreement or any other agreement hereafter entered into between fighter and GFL. Fighter's license as a mixed martial artist is suspended, revoked, refused by an athletic commission. Fighter refuses to appear at fighter's scheduled MMA fight. Fighter is disabled, sick, injured, or retires. Fighter is incarcerated. Fighter has his ability to travel restricted by a recognized government agency, or fighter is otherwise unable, unwilling, or refuses to compete or train for any MMA fights for any reason. So, again, it's pretty one-sided. Pretty common terms we see in MMA promotions, but pretty one-sided, that if you are unable to meet the obligations as demanded by the GFL, they can suspend you. They don't get the suspension. They don't give an exact date of how long the suspension is. It's basically, I guess, as long as they term necessary. I can't imagine going longer than the season because that's the length of the contract. But I guess if you piss them off somehow and you did something, one thing I will know it, because they have a confidential agreement and they learned that you shared this contract with other people, which many people have, I'm guessing they could suspend you and you could be suspended the entire length of the season and be out that season. But again, it's good to be a promoter. It's bad to be a fighter. The same old story.
Do they have an exclusive negotiating period and matching rights period?
Well, as we mentioned earlier about the matching right, we're going to get later. They do have that. They have a first negotiating rights. Fighters shall not negotiate, discuss, or enter in any agreement with any other individual or entity in the business of arranging, organizing, promoting, publicizing, conducting, recording, or distributing professional MMA fights, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. They have the period of 30 days at the end of the GFL season. So you're under contract for the GFL season until November 30th. 30 days after that, they have a exclusive negotiating period, a first negotiating right. You cannot negotiate with anybody else. After that period, and then during the period of the agreement, and then the 3 months afterwards, they have, following the termination or expiration of the agreement, I should say, they have a matching right period where the athlete agrees to grant GFL the exclusive right to match any bona fide offer received by athlete from any third-party promoter, league, or organization for the provision of the athlete's service as a professional mixed martial artist. Kind of interesting because they're a league format. How would you match an offer from a standard promoter that doesn't do the league format, right? Because it's completely different. League format, you fight during the year season. UFC would be like, what, a 3-fight offer, 5-fight offer, 1-fight offer. So maybe the GFL is could potentially get in the IFL fight business, which is, back when they had the super fights and stuff, instead of the team base, they do an occasionally a special fight. So maybe if they match, they would do something like that. But other than that, I don't know how they can, when you have a season format, how do you match a matching offer for someone that does not offer anything like that?
Is there any importance to the fact that the venue of law for all the contracts is in Nevada? To access the bonus content of this episode, you must be a paid subscriber. To do that, go to heynottheface.substack.com and subscribe today.
Ow! Ow! Not the face! Ooh! Ooh! Okay, the face!